Hello everyone. Today we're doing an interview again about what is dukkha for Bardo Cafe, and thank you Yeshe for participating and being with us.
Thank you for asking me to come.
Of course. Yeshe, you have a pretty interesting and extraordinary story to tell about your diagnosis of lymphoma and how you dealt with that, what it meant to have a diagnosis that is, it was a terminal diagnosis?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
And how that changed your perspective and, you know, what you sort of felt in that time during that process of, you know, dealing with that disease, but also with the prospects or the, you know, that you might be dying. And so I think you would like to talk about maybe about how it all led up to the diagnosis to lymphoma.
Probably, that's probably a good idea.
And how you sort of went through this emotional change, from what I understand. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, that would be great.
Well, yeah, it started off like, I would say about 6 months before the diagnosis, or even a little bit more, because I had something strange happening. I mean, my work has been for most of my life as a musician.
Yeah, you're a pretty prolific musician, and you have been for how many years?
I mean, I started as a teenager, so it's like 40-something years.
You've been touring as well, I think.
I've done a lot of international touring and lived that lifestyle.
Yeah. So and up until that point, you've been a musician, and you've been, you know, working as a musician and being touring and all of that. And So what has changed?
Well, first of all, I had this strange thing happening to my thumbs, and my thumbs are my main driving force on all the instruments that I play. I had this thing where they just kind of locked up. I mean, painful too, but they locked up. So I basically had to stop playing, and that was kind of weird, you know, because that was like, you know, like my whole identity of who I was threatened. You know, like who am I, you know, without being able to play. That was already really full on, and then so dealing with that, and then suddenly also this full on depression came in, and apparently according to one of the doctors I was talking to, he was an integrative doctor. He said that apparently lymphoma, like the first signs of lymphoma, is depression.
Yeah, wow.
And like, it was very strange for me because I never really experienced that before in my life. Any like the heavy depression like that, and feeling like really suicidal, and being like totally negative about the world, about my community, and going like, oh, this world is so terrible, and even saying things to my wife like, oh, don't worry about it if I'm not around tomorrow, you know, like, you know, there's nothing to live for, and it was really weird.
Did you feel that it was out of character?
Oh, totally, and it freaked me out. It was really like.
So it was quite a deep depression that you went into.
Oh, very deep, and feeling totally suicidal. I just felt like this world is really dark, and you know, like, you know, everyone is just out there for themselves, you know. And there's no, you know, I couldn't feel the community around me anymore, and I was complaining about, oh, you know, nobody cares about anything, you know, everybody just cares for themselves. You know, which turned around completely again. Then,
during that process,
doing the whole healing crisis, you know, that it just kind of, you know, it was amazing. It was like, so in a way, the illness, or, you know, whatever you want to call it, it was like kind of like the slap in the face that I needed to bring me back out of that space, because and then basically, so I was going through the depression, and then
what other symptoms did you have other than the depression? Because you must have felt at some point that you wanted to see a doctor to see what was happening. Did physical changes or
exactly
as well as mental?
I was just going to say that actually. I had suddenly, like, my organs here, my stomach, everything started swelling up. I was just thinking, wow, that's really weird, what's going on? And I went to the doctor, and she checked me out, and she said, oh, go in to get an ultrasound done. And then she said, if you feel any worse, because it was like, I think it was on a Wednesday, and I could only see her again on the Monday to get the results. She said, if anything happens in the meantime, you feel worse, just go straight to the emergency. And so then I had the ultrasound done, and then on the Friday evening, it was really strange, we were watching a movie, and then after the movie, I was kind of thinking, like, I don't feel any different, but I suddenly had this feeling like I wanted to get a second opinion anyhow. And I said to my wife, oh, maybe we call up the hospital, and if there's like not much going on in the emergency there right now, maybe we go and I get another checkup. And the timing was just perfect, because we rang up and they said, oh yeah, nobody's here, you can come now, and we live like 5 minutes away from the hospital, so we just went there. And the moment I walked in there, basically it was just like this roller coaster ride started. I just went totally downhill. I got this amazing pain in the backside of where the heart, like right behind, it was connected to the heart. And they had to lie me down, and there was this pain, and then they were trying to do x-rays there, but that hospital doesn't have that many facilities, so then they ended up getting me into another ambulance and driving me to Tweed Heads Hospital to get another opinion there. And then there they were doing some x-rays, and then they said, well, yeah, we're worried about all those organs, because they're all swollen up, but that's like secondary. We're really concerned about your heart, because your heart is just full of fluid, like where the pericardium is, and the heart sits in there. We meant to have maybe 25 milliliters or something like that of fluid, just to sort of lubricate it, and so the heart can move around in there. And I had 1.2 liters in there.
So that must have been life-threatening.
Well, they were saying normally at like 500 milliliters already you would go into cardiac arrest. So it was a miracle in itself that I was still going somehow. So then from that hospital they basically got me onto another ambulance, and they took me up to the heart center up in Griffith Hospital, and put me into emergency there, and then got me checked out there. And it was interesting because all these doctors came in, and we were all watching like my heart on this big monitor, and it kind of, to me, it kind of looked a bit funny too. I was saying to the guys, oh, it looks like some of these images, like at a techno party or something like that, where the heart was sort of like dancing in there, but it was because it was right up the top, because the fluid was like fully.
So did you know that it was life threatening, and how did you I know that you had an experience as well at some point, didn't you? Like a near-death experience. But when you were told, you know, this is life-threatening, how did you feel about that? How did you deal with that, I guess, in your mind? Or if you can describe it, I don't know.
Yeah, what was sort of interesting in that moment when I was still in that environment, there was so much going on. It was it was just very overwhelming.
Yeah.
Everything, you know, because they had all kinds of, like, you know, because it was the weekend, so there was a lot of people with drug overdoses coming in as well, and there was so much going on. But then when they finally got me in with this, there was this heart specialist. They got me upstairs into the heart center, and the timing of everything was just so perfect. Like, this doctor apparently just comes there once a year for 72 hours, and he volunteers to do the emergency stuff, and he's apparently the best guy they got.
Yeah, great.
And he was the only one who managed to do this procedure
to take the fluids out
without having a second person there to monitor it. Like, basically they said he could have done it blindfolded.
Yeah.
And the moment I came into the room with him, I just had this feeling, wow, if anybody can help me, it's this guy. He was just so calm and so amazingly beautiful. And so they booked us into the theater, but then he had a look and he said, now we don't actually have time for the theater. You're basically, we're like, he said, we've got an hour maximum.
Yeah.
And we're either gonna get you through this or not, you know. So he said, if you are okay with it, like the theater is not ready. We just got to do it here on the spot. And they basically just did a local.
Yeah.
But there was so much information that at the moment I couldn't quite digest it all. Yeah. But it's sort of like first of all, I felt safe with him, and at the same time I also felt like, well, you know, knowing this thing, like, well, in half an hour I can be either here or not be here. I was sort of okay with either outcome. I mean, I wanted to be here. It wasn't that, you know, because suddenly the whole, you know,
hey, we cherish our life.
Depression thing, you know, like that, it just went straight out the door, you know. I was like, you know, I wanted to live. But I was also okay if it wasn't gonna, you know, there was no fear somehow, and it surprised me, you know, because when I sometimes thought about those kind of scenarios, you know, I would probably think, oh, I probably would have some fear, you know, but in that moment somehow, so he basically did the procedure, because normally they have to have one guy who does like an X-ray type thing, so they can see when, because they got to pierce the heart sac, but because it's so close to the heart pumping, they can damage the heart really easy, you know. And I had to sign a thing basically saying, okay, I let them do that, and anything can happen, kind of thing. Like a disclaimer.
For sure. Okay.
And then he basically did the whole thing, you know, you put the needle in there, and I saw the whole thing happening, the needle, and then I had a total needle phobia up until then too, and somehow that went out the window too. So, and
and how did, so I don't really know when you had the near-death experience. Did you have that after you were diagnosed, or how did that?
Well, that was there, you know, for me.
Okay.
That was sort of like as close. Well, I don't know whether that's a near-death experience, but that was for me as close to death, you know. It was like in the end, it felt like a 15-minute window of where I I'm either going to be alive
Yeah.
or I'm going to be dead after
Yeah.
those 15 minutes. You
Yeah,
know?
and it's interesting that
Yeah.
the calmness sort of was there, for you not to have fear in that.
Yeah, and I don't know
in
what,
that
you know,
moment.
it just
Was
it was just
like
there,
that.
you know, it just happened.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that I planned, you know,
Yeah.
you got to be calm,
Yeah.
you know, or that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
It just, and also because he was just such a beautiful and gentle guy, you know, and even the way he spoke, you know, it was so. I just felt felt so relaxed and trusting in his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we were sort of wondering as well about, how kindness from other people and how, throughout this process, and I'm sure we're getting into that a little bit more, how that made a difference, because I have been working in palliative care for a long time, and I know that a lot of the time the way we show real interest in the other person and care for the other person is probably 95% of what we do, in the medical profession. That makes a difference, apart from the medical treatments and everything. And it just reminded me when you just said that the doctor just had this calm demeanor about him, that actually put you at ease as well.
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And the whole, I felt the whole treatment from the nurses too. In that moment, they felt like angels.
Yeah.
To me, and I even wrote, like the next day, I wrote this little thing and I stuck it on their blackboard there, of like how I felt like they were all angels.
Yeah.
Basically, and I was so grateful, and so blown away by their kindness. You know, it wasn't something that I really sort of expected, because I also had a bit of a phobia of hospitals, because I had quite a long stint in hospital when I was about 2.5 years old.
Yeah.
And that was back in Germany when the parents weren't actually allowed in. They were only allowed for like 1 hour a day for the visiting hours, and the rest of the time I was freaked out, and I was in there for like 6 weeks. As a 2.5-year-old, you don't really know
you need
what's
a bit more
going
care.
on, and you know, and so I had already that phobia. So I never even liked visiting people at the hospital. You know, I'd sort of like go in and out very quick. You know? So I was actually quite surprised and overwhelmed by the kindness, and also like for example, so after the procedure was done, that I ended up then with this tube in there, and it took and then I had this bag next to me where like over 72 hours, because they couldn't do it too fast, because it freaks the heart out apparently, like so with gravity slowly that fluid was sort of draining into this bag, and I was on this bed basically like totally hooked up with I had so many things coming in and out of me, all these monitors and pipes
tubes and everything.
Tubes and all of this, it was quite weird. And I had to have these nurses basically like
look
totally
after you.
Look after me. I couldn't go to the toilet. That was all happening. They had to clean me up, and that was very that was very humbling. And saying like, wow, like you guys are such angels, to kind of to do this, like it so moved me. It was pretty amazing.
So when you were in that situation and you were lying in bed, and did you? I imagine sometimes that when you're in that situation, you just go through it. You don't really maybe think about it too much, because you don't really have a choice, you know, you can't change it at the time. You know, how did you feel? So did you, because obviously that changed your whole life in a lot of ways, you know, to the independence that you had before, and now, you know, being in hospital and being dependent sort of on others as well. Do you remember how, did your priorities change in that way, or did you, you know, can you tell us a little bit about
it
it?
was like a full shift, you know, of like suddenly like all these things that I thought were important, like career, or, you know, like my image, you know, and as a musician and all of those, you know, like that just totally fell away, and it just was all, you know, it was more like, you know, like my inner circle, you know, like my family, the people that care for me, you know, my wife, my children, you know, friends, and the community around. That was the important thing. So from like the big picture of like being like out there and stuff like
because
that,
you've been touring and well known as well, I think.
So from going out, I just went in totally, you know, and that felt really good. And like I said, it was, you know, it was a very vulnerable place too, because also after that procedure, I couldn't even move. Like I had to learn how to walk again, you know, like I guess, you know, that stress to the body, that whole situation, it just put the body into some sort of shock. But I couldn't, so every day I had to, I think the first day I did like 6 steps, you know, with one of those walker things, you know. I mean, first I was like standing up, and then just feeling that, you know, how it feels standing up, and then I would walk, like 6 steps, and then I already felt like totally exhausted, and then had to be, you know, back on the bed, and then the next day I would do a few more steps, and then more.
So it just completely changed your world, I guess.
Absolutely.
And were you diagnosed at that point, or did that come later?
No, they still weren't quite sure what actually caused it. You know, like how this fluid got in there, basically, and they, you know, because they had the fluid and there was also quite a lot of it, they apparently had to somehow spread that whole fluid, you know, on sort of sheets that they then had to go through, and it took about a month until they actually completely went through it and then find
that it was the cells,
lymphoma.
Lymphoma cells. Okay.
So
yes. So then you were, I guess, diagnosed, and at that point it wasn't a terminal diagnosis, was it? Or was it the first time already? I think you had.
It was. It was.
It was
basically.
okay.
Basically, it's, you know, because you know, large B cell lymphoma. Like basically the hematologist came in. And he said, well, basically that's what it is, you know, large B cell lymphoma. He said it moves very fast, and it can. The problem with it too, he said, it's the one type of lymphoma too that can pass the blood-brain barrier. So it affects your spinal. Can affect your spinal cord and then also go into your brain. So that's why they're, besides the chemo, they were also doing lumbar punctures, where they would inject the chemo straight into the spinal fluid.
And how did you feel at the time when you got the diagnosis? Because we are talking about dukkha, which is translated. It can be translated into suffering, but also unsatisfactoriness, or that experience of having experiencing suffering. How did you feel? Is that how you would describe it, or can you tell us a bit more?
Well, at that stage, I was already kind of, because I had that experience already before.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like, well, maybe it's not my time yet. And I had quite I felt quite positive about the outcome, and the hematologist basically said at this stage that you're at, if we do it like straight away, if we get onto it, you have like a 70% chance of survival.
Yeah.
And I thought, 70 it's pretty good,
Yeah.
It's like, the odds are pretty good. And I really felt like, well, I don't think it's my time yet. And by that stage, I had also, because sitting at the hospital, not much goes on. I mean, or a lot goes on, because I was in a room with like 3 other people, and there was quite a few interesting cases in there, and so it was like, but I sort of was really into like just being in my own space, so I always sort of like put the curtains up around me, and I wasn't into watching TV or anything, so I was just in my own space, like doing quite a lot of reflection. And
what did you reflect on?
Well, I try to change my perspective on like how I was looking at things, because I could see it made a big difference. And I watched this great documentary called Heal at the time, and there was a lot of people that were having these kind of diagnoses that I had, and and how they were talking about the placebo effect, and how positive thinking can make a huge difference. And then I thought, well, that totally resonates with me, and so I was trying to, straight away I was thinking, okay, I'm just going to do positive thinking, like and that was my exercise basically. Like whenever there was a negative thought coming in, I would just replace it with something else, and also because I spent a lot of time in Africa, and I've seen a lot of suffering over there with my African family, I call them, because because my whole music journey was in Africa. I learned music in Africa from African teachers, and I lived with them in often in ghetto situations, because that's where the best music is.
Oh yeah.
Totally.
That's where, comes from the heart. I guess.
Yeah, that's where all the creativity happens. And I was always thinking, well, I'm in a bad situation, but it could be a lot worse, because my friends over there, if they would have this happening, they wouldn't even have the luxury that I have here of being taken care of by these people like that. So I've got a really good chance already. So that's, so I try to always kind of switch it around and look at the positive side. Or I was watching, like in the cancer ward, for example, I would watch like little kids that were there with cancer. And, and I felt like, what do I have to whinge about, to complain, really, because...
you lived a full life.
Yeah, I already lived like almost 60 years, like at that stage, I've lived my life. These guys are like, you know, some of them were like 5, 6 years old, and they were amazing.
Yeah.
You know, they were like little Buddhas.
Is there anything else you would like to share in terms of, you know, what's your priorities now? I mean, you're still a musician, you're still, you know, doing amazing work, but how do you approach life now? How does it change you?
Well, I guess it's an age thing too. Like for me, you know, I'm now 64, and when the thing first happened, I was 58, or was just before my 58th birthday actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I had my 58th birthday in the hospital, and so yeah, I definitely don't want to go back into the whole touring story.
Yeah.
Because it's actually, you know, it's very taxing, like the whole lifestyle, you know. It's like, you know, it's very exciting when you're young, and but it's not
as easy anymore.
Yeah, no,
when
and yeah, well,
older.
it's also like, because the time you actually end up doing like what you love doing, which is the music, is actually the shortest time in there. The rest of the time is like travel and interviews and being in a different hotel every night, or being on a tour bus, or you know, or like all this, you know, not getting enough sleep, you know, like coming back from a gig and you're buzzing from the adrenaline, and then you're trying to go to sleep, because you know, like, oh, I got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning again, because we got to go to the airport to go to the next place, or we got to start driving to go to the next place, or whatever. You know, it's very kind of, and trying to find good food on the road is not that easy too, and so it's a very taxing lifestyle. So I'm not really
so that's changed
keen, and
anyway.
I don't really want to, you know, I really, like, I went into this whole inner journey basically through the healing, and it feels really good, you know, like it put me also, like, what's the whole thing about impermanence too? It was like a wake-up call for me when I suddenly, like, I was getting so close to, like, hey, this could have been it, you know, like, I could have been gone now. So the thing that I regretted the most was like, oh, you know, because I got into Buddhism when I was younger. I met Kalu Rinpoche when I was like 14 years old, and then it was kind of like always, you know, like dabbling a bit in there. But through my whole music journey, it was, you know, there was no time, and my energy went elsewhere. And then I had stints, like later on, when I connected with Lama Tachen in California, and had a bit of stint there, but then, you know, also went back more into the music. So I was sort of dabbling with it a bit. It was always like there, and it was like, yeah, one day I start.
Yes.
One day I start getting into it a bit more, you know, like not right now, you know. And then suddenly it's like, wow, you know, I better. You know, like, this could have been it. You know, I better get cracking, and so it brought me really back to my spiritual journey, and in that way, I'm so thankful for it. And I always say, like, you know, one of my biggest gurus was cancer. Like, I learned so much, so many amazing lessons through that dukkha, through that suffering, you know. It really, it was the wake-up call that I needed, I feel. You know?
And really focusing on what's important in terms of a spiritual sense as well, with Buddhism, and do you now, with your music, you do a lot of mantra recitations, and also being in the community. I think as well with your music and spreading, you know, a bit of kindness and healing in that way. Is that? Would you say that's
totally?
that's
Yeah.
accurate, or?
Well, also what was interesting in like when I was going through the chemo, because the chemo was intense. That was like, I mean, talking about suffering, talking about dukkha. That was like, that was it. Because I was also, it was a very strong chemo apparently. You know, because when I was in the cancer ward, most people in there were coming in like for the day, and they would get hooked up to the machine maybe for like a couple of hours, and then they would go home. But I had this treatment where I had to go in for a whole week, and I was basically hooked up to the machine 24/7.
Oh yeah.
And then I would be in this. I had my own section there because I was.
You were in isolation.
Yeah, I was in isolation. I was like cytotoxic or whatever. You know, anyone that came in, they had to, they had to put a special suit on and have gloves and mask and the whole thing. And so that was and
pretty intense. Yeah.
that was very intense. And they would also then, while I was in there, they would give me steroids, so I was quite bubbly in there, and during that week, and then so I would get this strong chemo, the steroids, and then at the end they were giving me like a peg injection that I think stimulates your what's the stuff? Your bone marrow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
For creating like
healthy
cells.
Yeah.
And that's a really full-on thing too. And I would like the moment I would come home, I was like a zombie, and I was just like basically like kind of, it felt like I was just crawling between the bed and the toilet. That was sort of like the next 2 weeks. And in that space, I couldn't even listen to music.
Okay.
I really I couldn't listen to any music. And then I slowly, like the first sort of things that I started listening to was kind of like kirtans. You know, that was like, oh, that kind of feels really soothing. And then I was getting back into mantras, you know, like the Buddhist mantras, you know, like the Medicine Buddha mantra. And then like slowly via that, because the mantras felt really good. I would like here and there just pick up one of my instruments and just play along a little bit and find ways of like just playing something really simple and singing the mantra
the recitations,
along with it. And then I had a friend who was very persistent and very consistent in like trying to get me back into playing a bit. He said like, oh, even if you like, he was a musician that I played before a lot. And he would come and he'd say, like he was a great support anyhow, you know, coming around, checking and seeing how I was. I was generally not ready to see a lot of people, you know. So my wife did a very good job of being
keeping people out.
What they call in a performing environment being the door bitch. You know? keeping people outside.
Security guard.
Like the security guard. You know, she was amazing.
Yeah.
And she was totally amazing in the whole journey.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I want to give credit to her because she was there. Like
just
I feel like 150%, and that made a huge difference.
Oh yeah.
Of having that kind of support.
Yeah.
You know, that really helped me.
And it really highlights the interdependence of us, isn't it? I mean, we think that we are independent and that we don't need anyone and that we are, you know, sort of, we are our own people. And But I think in situations like this, you know, it really highlights how much we are independent, dependent on others and dependent on others people's kindness, to, you know, and having that connection and having that love and that, getting some healing from them in the darkest times of our lives, you know.
Yeah.
I think that, it sort of highlights that, doesn't it? Because we always think that we're fine, you know, I don't need anyone else and I'm okay. But I think it's really good to remember that as well, just for our audience. Thank you so much, Yeshe. I mean, it's just amazing how, you know, hearing your story and how things have changed for you. And I can see that you're quite calm and sort of at peace as well. Is that, you know, with how things are now?
Yeah, I think I feel a lot more at peace actually than before. Absolutely.
Yeah, I can tell. It's just
and also the music. I mean, my music really changed. You know, it's a lot more chilled. And
I guess more on a spiritual sort of basis as well.
Yeah. Like I said before with my friend, like he was, you know, he would come around, was very persistent. We would like maybe play 5 minutes and then I lose energy.
Yeah.
And then he'd come back again a week later and he'll try again.
Yeah.
And that's when I then basically wrote some songs around mantra, and now I feel like I'm just starting to get into doing some social work.
Okay.
Actually working with people that go through things like especially anxiety and stuff like that, and because music can be such a healer. It's so therapeutic. And
for sure.
So I want to channel more into like the healing aspect on music, because I've had so much time in that healing space too. Because really, like, I mean, I used to be the guy, you know, like I would hardly ever be at home. You know, I'd be always out there. Someone come home to sleep kind of thing, you know. And now it's kind of the opposite. I just want to be at home and not really go anywhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? How it's switched around.
Yeah.
And we would love to hear some music from you, just as a finish. Would you be happy to do that?
Yeah,
maybe a mantra.
I might have to retune this just quickly.
Yeah, no problem.
Samudgate so